And welcome back. Now, as I've spoken about throughout the program, over 90% of Australia's COVID-19 cases are currently in Victoria, and the new clusters in Sydney are related to the state's strain. But Daniel Andrews is refusing to answer really important questions about this, and many are now becoming frustrated with the Victorian Premier's handling of the crisis or lack of it. Let's bring in our panel, Sky commentator and author Catherine McGregor and Melbourne councillor Nicholas Reece. Nicholas, how has Daniel Andrews gone from being the tough Premier who had the hardest lockdowns in the state, who had this virus out of control, to relinquishing control of hotel quarantine to private contractors who were unable to do their job, and now this is just out of control?
Well, look, it has been events, my dear, as I think the old English saying goes. Look, you're right, Victoria did have the toughest lockdown laws. We were the first to go to stage 3, first to go to school closures, but we've obviously had a terrible stuff-up occur in the hotel quarantining process. This has led to outbreaks through some of the northern and western suburbs of the city, and now we're in this terrible situation where we've got community transmission occurring today, or continuing to grow into 428 new cases today. And you know, Daniel Andrews is a Premier who is under an enormous amount of pressure. In terms of where things go to now, I mean, he has announced a judicial inquiry into what's occurred. That's commencing next week, and it's to report by September. And make no mistake, there will be a day of reckoning in terms of what did occur around that hotel quarantining process.
Catherine, relatively speaking, he is still fairly popular in the polls, although his standing has dropped significantly. Do you think this will ultimately become a leadership issue? There are already leadership rumblings.
I think his position within his own party is unassailable, Shari. I could be wrong on that. You know, I don't want to be the PVO of Sky and make predictions that turn to ash. But the fact is, he won a resounding victory. He's against a fairly weak opposition. They're not credible. But as Nicholas has said, there has to be an accounting for this. And I think it's unsatisfactory that so much of that is being outsourced and kicked down the road. The Parliament needs to be reconvened. He needs to be under scrutiny as part of the principle of responsible government. And the numbers speak for themselves. There's something aberrant in the way this has been handled down there. Someone has to run on their sword. I would be starting with some of the ministers who are responsible, and the implementation of that no tender application of private security guards to really critical points of failure is unforgivable, and the rest of Australia is now reaping a grim harvest.
Absolutely, and I think when we get the answers on what went down, why those security firms were given those contracts, you know, we can absolutely expect heads to roll on that. Nicholas Reece, over in New South Wales Health and the government has refused to take up the offer from some pubs and hotels to use their CCTV footage to help do contact tracing, because they say this could, affect people's privacy. Is this a good enough reason?
Look, I'm sure there's a civil libertarian debate that could be run here, saying that the sharing of that footage is a bad thing. But this is a pandemic, Shari, and we need to use whatever interventions, whatever technology is available to us to shut it down. I mean, it's in the same way as the COVID-19 app was a sensible intervention, trying to use new technology that's available to us to get on top of this thing. So too, accessing that footage, if it can stop the virus from spreading, then that can be a saviour of lives. So I have absolutely no problems with the footage being made available, and I think the hotel should make it available.
Yeah, and Catherine, in one example, the Star Casino in Sydney, which has about 3,000 security cameras, there's not a spot you would go in that casino without being filmed. They offered up their footage to New South Wales Health after they had a positive case, but New South Wales Health said they couldn't use it for privacy reasons. It just doesn't make sense, though, does it? Because when you go to a venue like that, you know there is security footage. Yeah. So why would this then be an issue, particularly if it can help track who that infected person came into contact with?
Couldn't agree more. You implicitly accept the terms under which you enter those premises. Most people now know that we're a surveillance society very much. You know, you go into a 7-Eleven, you go to a gas station, you're pretty much likely to be on film. There's all kinds of cameras in public places, and most people accept that as a fact of life. And I think given the gravity of the circumstances we're facing, I don't think too many people would have a quibble with that. Indeed, the argument that's being had about limits on pubs and so on, I think most patrons would say if it's the difference between being able to still go to the pub and have a drink with a few mates and being on film, they'd probably willingly soak that up, I suspect.
Yeah. Look, I interviewed Troy Bramston a moment ago. I don't know if you both heard the interview, but he spoke very convincingly on the Palace Papers and how the Queen really didn't know about this and how ludicrous it is for people to be now calling for Australia to become a republic on the basis of these Palace letters, although he does support a republic, he made clear. Nicholas Reece, has Labor gone too far linking this particular issue to the need for Australia to become a republic?
Oh, not at all, Sherry. I mean, look, I think what the papers revealed was that the Queen was not notified by the Governor-General of his intention to sack the Prime Minister. But the very fact that there was these 271 items of correspondence and that there was advice going back and forth between Buckingham Palace from the Queen and her Private Secretary to the Governor-General of Australia, I think is a really powerful reminder of Australia still is a constitutional monarchy, and in this country the buck sort of stops with Buckingham Palace, and that's a completely unsatisfactory situation for a modern, outward-looking country like ours. I mean, you know, the royal family were great and part of the Australian picture back in 1900, but here in 2020 they have no place, and I think the fact that this is in the news again just reminds people of that.
Catherine, what do you think? Do these Palace Papers in any way strengthen the call for a republic?
No. Look, number of points, Sherry. The monarchy, as Nicholas has it correctly identified, the only thing I'll agree with, is actually hardwired into our constitution. So it's pretty hard to unscramble. Unlike Malcolm Turnbull's nonsense that was repudiated in 1999, and I might add, I was a Republican at that time and voted for it, I wouldn't again, because no one can satisfactorily explain to me how you can unscramble Section 64 of the Constitution and the implicit underpinnings of our system of government by just changing the preamble or doing something with, they think there's a minimalist republic. There isn't. The monarchy or the royal prerogative is actually hardwired into our system of responsible government. And as for this furor that's happened this week, there's two things wrong with the Republican movement. They've got a divisive figure in charge of it. He needs to step aside because you can't, under Section 128 of our Constitution, get a majority of voters in a majority of states unless a lot of Conservatives cross the line and support a proposal. Fitzsimons is the wrong guy for it. And if Jenny Hocking and the rest of them want to sit down at Glebe and hum the It's Time jingle and talk about throwing themselves in front of Lyndon Johnson's limousine, good luck to them. But the rest of the country's got bigger fish to fry at the moment.
I'm sorry, Catherine. I mean, if Australia took that attitude, it's all too hard, don't bother, we never would have achieved anything as a country, would we? I'm not saying becoming a republic is easy, but it's very much a worthwhile thing. I mean, it's beyond contemplation that in 2 decades, 100 years from now, we still have ourselves tied to the apron strings of Britain. We've got to move forward. I'm not saying it's easy, but it has to be done. And as for Fitzsimons, I mean, that's a totally unfair selection. He has done a great job in energising the Republican movement in Australia and putting it back into the national debate.
Nicholas, calm down. You're in lockdown, mate. Calm down.
But,
I'm worried about you.
Nicholas, Catherine does have...
Go and read the Australia Act. We're not tied to the apron strings of the United Kingdom at all. It's nonsense. We've got a domestic head of state who is the Crown responsible in Parliament, advised by an Executive Council who happened to be called the Cabinet. We're totally governed within Australia. As the crisis in 1975 was resolved in Australia by the dismissal of the government in a poll held on December 13, where the people expressed their voice.
Nicholas, doesn't Catherine have a point when she talks about Peter Fitzsimons' role? His position not just nowhere near mainstream, nowhere near the centre, not even on the left, but he's on the far left. And to win over Australians, mainstream Australians, to the cause of a republic, you do need someone who can speak to them, who's not divisive. And when you look at the leadership of the Republic movement has had, maybe it has been wrong having Malcolm Turnbull and then Peter Fitzsimons.
Well, I mean, I disagree with you, Sharry. I mean, I don't think Peter Fitzsimons can be characterised as someone on the far left, and I say that as someone who knows plenty of people on the far left, and I can tell you he's not one of them. He's driven by common sense, Peter Fitzsimons. And look, he's a larger-than-life character. I think he's put a heap of energy into the Republican movement in this country. There was a lot of momentum going into the last election. Don't forget, I mean, Labor had made a commitment to putting the Republic to a plebiscite if it was elected. They've appointed a minister for the Republic. So there was a lot of ground that was made, and that was in no small part to the efforts of Peter Fitzsimons. So I won't hear a bad word about him. Actually, I think he's really put a heap of energy into it and made great progress for the Republican movement.
I think anyone who reads his columns on a regular basis would disagree with you characterising him as from the far left.
Gratuitously offensive to anyone who believes in God, gratuitously offensive to all manner of persons, including anyone who doesn't vote Labor slavishly. He's a very polarising figure. Whatever his other strengths, Nicholas, he's the wrong guy. Now, bring it on. Put the ballot on.
Look, you're both just playing the man. And look, this is an issue which is much bigger than any individual. It's about our nation's future, our destiny, and whether we want to be our own country with our own person as head of state. And I'm all for that. And it sounds like you two are against it.
Now, Catherine, let's just very quickly, I want to get your view on another topic before we have to go to a break. Donald Trump has sacked his campaign manager. Is this a good move?
Well, where do you start? Clearly, the opinion polls are now starting to fall into lockstep to show that he's in serious political trouble. And clearly you don't remove a key campaign advisor this close to voting day unless your campaign is both alarmed and in disarray. So make what you will of it. But I think he's facing a real struggle. And the fact that that's occurring, regardless of COVID, the fact that he only has to beat Joe Biden about whose wellness, there's a real legitimate question. I don't say that with any glee. I feel sorry for the guy. I think he's struggling with the ageing process, and the fact that he's almost unopposed and still in trouble, I think shows he's in dire straits. Yeah.
Nicholas, very, very quickly, can Donald Trump still win, or is he finished?
Oh, look, you'd never say never with someone like Donald Trump, but it is looking pretty bad. I mean, he's got over 10 points behind in major opinion polls. Amongst women, he's 20 points behind. Amongst blacks, he's almost 80 points behind. And I think black community in America is turning out this time. That's one thing you can be assured of.
Yeah. Catherine McGregor, Nicholas Reece, thank you very much for your views today, and have a lovely weekend.